Doc, rev up the DeLorean and get me out of here. It's Mike and Tom with the first, the last, the Nerdom.
Hey Tom, how you doing?
Hey, I thought I'd hang out on the beach and enjoy the last bit of sun as it's going down for our podcast. And yeah,
Yeah, no, I love it. You know what? We were just kind of talking about that. It works very well.
hmm
you know what? I think you just created a new effect for the internet. So if you're out there, maybe get in touch with Tom and ask him how he did it, because it's a secret, ninja secret. But yeah, no, all joking aside here, and this is of course like the 10th time I've had to restart us because I had some kerfluffles with the AI. The AI was on strike, and we had to promise the AI, the free AI, that we would continue to use it in a ethical and safe and some other crap manner. Blah 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 blah. Anyway, yeah. So obviously we've got it plastered all over our set here. But this week is going to be a lot of fun. Was really At some point we were going to cross over into this world, but I think we kind of avoided it a little bit for a long time because it's like all the cool kids did it first. But in any case, yeah. So how you been, Tom?
I'm good. I'm good. Yeah, we're the first, the last, the Nerdom. I'm Thomas, and I'm here with Mike. This is our little podcast that we do where we talk about movies and cool stuff like comic books and various things. And this week, yeah, like Mike hinted at, we're going to be looking at Back to the Future. We're going to look at Back to the Future 1 and 2. We may mention 3, but we just rewatched the first two.
Yep.
But yeah, we've got our little channel here. If you're new to the channel, we have a very big back catalog. So if you click on our name, you could kind of take a look. We'll kind of spotlight what we do here. But yeah, we talk from everything from Barbie to weird cult animated movies like Fire and Ice. So here across the board, we've got over 100 videos, approaching 150, where we run the gamut. We've talked about
Yep.
Italian giallos.
Yep.
We've talked about spaghetti westerns, Midsummer. We talked about that. But yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a bit of a grab bag, so to speak, of what we cover. Who knows what we'll cover next? But yeah, give us a like and subscribe if it sounds like something you might be interested in.
Yeah, and we are driving really hard to get to 100 subscribers by the end of the year. That is something that we normally are pretty soft around these things, and we just kind of are doing it for fun. And we still will always continue to do it for fun and for the love of it. But we really
hmm
would like to be able to pick up another 45, 50 subscribers between now and the end of the year. We have some very, very big monsters coming up, ones that inspired this whole thing for us to do in Dune. That's going to be out very shortly. It's going to be here, and it's going to be upon us very shortly.
hmm
Before we both know it, I can't wait, and
hmm
I'm waiting. But before we get too far, like Tom was saying, I do want to shout out to. I was really proud of our second outing for Nerding Out, our new show, where we continue along the lines of our evolution of our grab bag kind of free flowing
hmm
show, where we're just nerding out, and we talk about Barbie. We cover quite a bit. We cover Andrew Tate. We give an opinion. We serve it up. I also wanted to, like Tom mentioned, the Fire and Ice, but I did want to spend a little bit more time, kind of throwing out that wonderful last few shows have been really fun, with what we do in the shadows. I picked up that TV show and I love it.
hmm
I kind of stalled out a little bit on it, but you only have so much time in the day and the week.
Oh yeah.
But and Lady Hawk was fun as well. But anyway, like you were saying, but please, if you see what you like, and please subscribe. We'd very dearly love it. We do this for the fun of it. We're just two fun nerd guys, and we, like Thomas was saying, we also expanded our coverage to horror and cult classics and whatnot. But in any case, to the main event. To the main event.
hmm
I gotta say, Tom, that background, that really really works well. I gotta
Yeah.
say that really works well. And it was just for messing around, kind of like what we do.
Yeah.
We're just kind of messing around, and you find something that works.
Yeah.
And
I
and
need
it
a
works.
little fruity drink. All I've got is my I got my boomer juice here, and
Yeah.
I
Yeah, I've got my standard issue beer, and my water and coffee as well. As we do this at different times of the day, mainly at night. But here we are, and we're on the Back to the Future train. And like you were saying, we're
Mhm.
not doing the third one because that's not really nobody really remembers that one. Although fondly you probably do because it's no more. But this one, these two, the first Back to the Future 1 and 2. Um, and we were kind of talking a little bit. I kind of wanted to lead off with we were talking offline about Quentin Tarantino. Tom and I have our own little chit chat as the show kind of develops in the back on the back page, so to speak. And we were talking about Quentin Tarantino and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And I had never seen it all the way through because I had heard different things, and plus I just kind of just didn't have time or just didn't make time. And recently watched it, but reason why I'm bringing that up, I loved it, and the soundtrack was amazing. And Tom has read the book, you recommend it as well. But never mind that. Last year around this time is when Quentin Tarantino's book came out about cinema. I love that book. It was very good. Taught me a lot of things that I didn't know about from his perspective. But one thing that he says in interviews is they ask him, "Hey, what would you consider a perfect movie, so to speak?" And one of the ones that he mentions is Back to the Future. And going back and looking at it through that lens, I don't disagree with him. I actually agree with him that it is a quintessential perfect movie in some regards. The pacing is right. Everything is not on top of. You also kind of have to add in the nostalgia factor, but even beyond that, I don't think that. I mean, if I were looking at this super critically, which I have a very poor lens, my critic lens is kind of smudgy. I think your critic lens is much sharper, in my opinion. If I were to rate us. But in any case, what are your thoughts on that? That it being the perfect movie, so to speak, or kind of separating out nostalgia just from the 50,000 foot view, as you went back into it and you came out of it.
Yeah. Well, it's has always been a crowd pleaser, in that sense it provides it. One of the things about movies is you can't please everybody all the
No,
time,
no,
but I think
you're right about that.
there's a little bit of something for everybody in this movie. um there's a hook for everybody, and yeah, I've always been on the weird side. I always like the weirder things, and there's enough kind of weirdness to it that will hook me. But it's you got you have to remember this is 1985 when it came out. Michael J. Fox was huge on the small screen with Family Ties. Family Ties was a huge situation comedy, and he was the big star of it. And yep, that was just perfect casting for this. He was just prime set to blow up for this. And yeah, so you had the hot teen kid that would rope in all the young girls because they all liked Michael J. Fox. You had nostalgia with them going back to 1950s, so you got your parents excited about it. So yeah, it's just sort of this perfect meld of being able to attract everybody, and that there's enough things in there that was kind of a little bit risque, but was very much a wholesome movie that everybody could watch and enjoy, and all the stuff that the whole thing with with Marty Fly and his mom. That's kind of weird, but they kind of do it in a such a comedic tone, that it never gets too weird or too off-putting. So the movie rides that line and is able to, and it is the fact that it has some weird turns, and spoiler for the first 10 minutes of the movie. Dog gets killed by Libyan terrorists. I mean, come
Yep.
on. so
Right.
so so there's that edge to it to where it doesn't get schmaltzy. Because a lot of family or family oriented movies gets really schmaltzy and cutesy to the point where I can't stomach them. Whereas this one has enough edge to it, but not too much to
Right.
where it's either off putting or it is perfect in that sense, is that it's and you can maybe think of it as a detriment to say it's a crowd pleaser, because you think of crowd pleasers as being maybe less or making compromises, but this is a crowd pleaser without compromising.
Right. Right. Yeah, it does, you're right. It does kind of roll up on the curb a little bit, or kind of kiss the curb a little bit as far as inappropriateness, or kind of that.
Hmm.
But it's very much in an 80s PG way. To
Oh
like
yeah,
where
absolutely.
it's definitely, and I think what I think makes this movie work also, and stands the test of time. Well, one, I just come out right out of the gate. I adored Michael J. Fox growing up. I loved him.
Hmm.
In my favorite '80s family sitcom type movie was the one he did with he was Alex P. Keaton,
Yeah,
Family
Family
Ties.
Ties. Yep.
Family Ties. Yep. Every time that came, of course, I think it was off the air by the time I kind of started, was able to watch it, maybe a little
Hmm.
bit. But in any case, I caught anytime I could, anytime that was on TV, I would watch it. I don't know why. I just loved it. Um, I love that kind of that whole thing. But anyway, the point being that I want to make here is that it's very much 80s family friendly, and they have a way with subtlety which modern movies do not have.
Hmm.
Like very few modern movies have the art of subtlety down, or do it somewhat well. Maybe not great, but the good movies that can do that very well play very strongly, and this is one of those where the subtlety, it doesn't have a lot of exposition. You are along the ride there with there is no narration. There is just kind of this you're dropped in this crazy zany adventure. And I also remember watching this as a kid growing up, and I remember falling in love, mainly because I looked up to Michael J. Fox as a role model for me personally. And I just remember, anything I could watch or see, I just adored. And I always remember that Toyota pickup truck when at the end of the movie, spoiler alert. This is not really a spoiler, but at the very end of the movie, like when things are kind of set right, or this new future, kind of thing happens from fixing the past. He had this really cool pickup truck, and I just thought that was the coolest thing,
Hmm.
growing up, amongst many things, obviously. There are so many touchstones here that folks like, my love of Nike. Just small little things like that, little nods. Well,
Hmm.
actually, that's for the second movie, but all points being the same.
Hmm.
Yeah, this one, and I just recently had rewatched this with my kiddos. Well, mainly my daughter. My son was off gaming, doing his own thing. But I digress. This was just, oh man, I just kind of sat here and I was kind of pausing it every once in a while and making commentary with my daughter. And God bless her, she stuck with me. And I think they had actually seen it years before with their mom. I think
Okay.
she actually introduced it to him. But in any case, it was a treat. It's always a treat, especially if you haven't seen it for a long time. And here we are. We are sitting we are literally sitting a couple years away from a quarter of a century after 2000s in the 21st century here. And it's God, it holds up. It
Hmm.
holds up. It was just really fun for us to go through. But in any case, I'm glad that we could get into this. And Robert Zemeckis, no stranger to making great movies, good movies in the '80s, for sure. I know you probably have a little bit more. Christopher Lloyd, but this was iconic, and I knew at some point we get around to it. But oh man, even the music was kind of fun, especially kind of the memes that came from it, later on. But in any case, I was gonna say, but oh, that's for the second movie. I have my notes here
Yeah.
out of order.
Yeah.
But oh, Of course, what were your thing like? Did you see this when you're a little bit older than I am? Not by much, but yeah, a little bit. But you probably did you get a chance to see this in the theater or like when it came out rented or what was that experience like? If you could take us back for
Yeah.
your affinity for this film.
hmm Yeah, back then you had to walk 2 miles in the snow to see a movie.
Right.
No, yeah, it's yeah, I did go see it in the theater. Back then it was, nowadays I don't see everything in the theater, but
Yeah.
back then, because you could see a nice movie on a widescreen at home on a big screen TV, whereas back in the day you had the big, the small square shaped TVs. So to see a big quote unquote summer blockbuster, you really did have to go to the movie theater to actually get the full effect, the full widescreen movie. And this one was obviously the talk of the town. Everybody had to see the new movie Back to the Future. Like I said, with Michael J. Fox,
Right.
he was set to explode. I mean, he'd already exploded on the small screen with Family Ties,
Hmm.
and it just had, like I said, it's a crowd pleasing movie. So yeah, the buzz for it was out there, and yeah, I think when I was reading about it, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, they started shopping around the movie in 1980, and they none of the studios wanted it. I think they shopped it around to 40 different studios, which is surprising that there's that many back in the day. I'm sure that's much smaller now, but yeah, everybody turned it away because it wasn't risque enough. The big comedies during the early '80s was like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which were and Porky's and things like that. That they were a little bit more raunchy, and and this movie wasn't risque enough. And then they take it to Disney, and they say it was too risque with the whole mom thing. So yeah, they really couldn't
That's
get it off
funny.
the ground until
Really.
Robert Zemeckis did "Romancing the Stone" and
Mm.
got some traction with that, and then kind of paired up with Steven Spielberg and his studio to really get it rolling. And then the funny thing is when they wrote it in 1980, they had that Ronald Reagan line in it, him being the president.
Right.
And then they finally got to where they could film it in 1984. But that was election year, so they weren't sure if Reagan was going to be voted in again. So they were waiting for the results to film that. Or well, they filmed the scene, but they waited to see if he got reelected to be able to use that scene in the movie because they couldn't if he didn't get elected.
That's funny. Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, there were so many iconic scenes that this movie sparked, from the DeLorean to
hmm
skateboards to hoverboards to self-lacing shoes. As we get on get on down the road, we're kind of mashing things together here a little
Yep.
bit. Of course, the second, of course, just for those that are unfamiliar, if you're out there and you've never seen Back to the Future, the synopsis that
Mhm.
I would say would be in the first movie, they go back in time to the 50s, and then to when Marty McFly's parents meet, or pivotal moment when they meet. And then in the second movie, they go into the future for Marty McFly's kids.
Yeah.
Something with his son was going to happen very bad that they had to prevent. Um, and of course that kind of sets the scene for what we're talking about here a little bit. But and of course the DeLorean famously couldn't fly in the first movie, but it could do that later on in the second
Yep.
movie, or actually at the very end of the first movie, you get a sneak peek at the next one. That
hmm
definitely, I have no doubt, had you seen this in the theater like you did, and you saw that ending, you were like, oh man, I can't wait for the second one to come out.
hmm
And I was gonna
Which,
say so. Oh,
fun
go ahead.
fact, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale, they ended it like that, but they had no plans on making a sequel.
That's
So
funny.
yeah, so then and then I think the studio got around to saying, well, if you don't make a sequel, we're gonna make it without you. So they
Right.
they kind of got roped into it. But yeah, they they kind of kicked themselves in back end when they started doing the second one, because they kind of were hemmed in on what it was going to be about, because they already had set it up
Right.
for the at the end, so they had to include the girlfriend in it. So that's why she gets knocked out early on in the second
Oh,
one, because yeah, they didn't want to have to deal with her too much, and they had to switch actresses as well. It's kind of interesting because obviously they're testing it out, and so Marty gets put in the past, but he also, butterfly effect, he kind of messes things up,
yeah.
because I guess his father was perving on his mother. Yeah, well, obviously they weren't dating at the time, but in the how they met originally was he falls out of the tree, and she nurses him back to health, but
Right.
Marty gets gets mixed up in that, and it's him that his mom actually takes care of after the fall from the tree. But yeah, it's the whole idea with playing around with time travel and whatnot. That's been was traditionally used for hard sci-fi, or sci-fi TV shows and movies like The Twilight Zone, and obviously Star Trek had played around with time travel as well.
Sure.
So this was kind of unique at the time to make a sci-fi comedy that was kind of something new that hadn't been done, at least at that time period. So again, that was it was light enough sci-fi to where the average person would want to go see it. Like I said, it was they were going back in time to the 1950s, so your parents that would kind of frown at a sci-fi movie wouldn't frown at this, because hey, the most of it's taking place in the 50s, and they could kind of overlook the sci-fi elements.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and of course, we've kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'll hit it directly. This movie and the series of movies, minus the third one, even the third one kind of it made an impact, but these two made such a cultural impact
Hmm.
beyond that they resonated so far out in time and space. And one of those things, like whereas we have the classic '80s family, not quite edgy, wholesome compared to nowadays, family entertainment, where they would kind of slightly just kind of brush past something that was, kind of maybe a little bit more um, risque, or something along those lines. Boy, the two that we haven't mentioned yet, but Rick and Morty take that. They are, if you're unfamiliar, Rick and Morty are a cartoon series loosely based on this idea, of Back to the Future. But in that case, they just take that and they just bust. They don't just brush past it. They bulldoze into everything, in their own unique, edgy way of doing it, in a way that even would probably make South Park blush a little bit, or kind of clap off on the
Yeah,
sidelines. But
yeah.
it
I don't
had
know. I don't know how many times I had to tell Mike to shut up because he starts screaming "Pickle Rick" and running
yeah.
around, jumping around, saying screaming "Pickle Rick." But no, I saw the I saw the ads when Rick and Morty first came out. I saw the ads on Adult Swim, and I was like, oh, it's just a knockoff of Back to the Future, and didn't give it a second look until people were buzzing about how wild and crazy the show was. So, and then, I watched it and I was like, okay, well, it is a kind of a take on Back to the Future, but they're doing their own thing, and then kind of taking it into a direction that, yeah, it's, like Mike was saying, it's a cultural thing. Back to the Future inspired a bunch of things afterwards. But yeah, it's and hats off to Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale for the coming up with this crazy idea. I think the I was reading Bob Gale had the idea for the movie because he was looking at his father's yearbook and was looking. at him as a teenager and his friends, and he's like, would I ever have gotten along with my dad if I was his age? He goes, I don't think I would. And
Right.
he kind of brought the idea to Robert, and that was kind of the genesis of this idea. Another, and it seems like that obviously they had 5 years to kind of set on the movie, but they were kind of still working on it. So there's another thing to be said for not rushing a movie into production. If you have time to sit on it and kind of work on it, you could refine it and make it one of the better things, more than what it would have been previously. Also, they had the luxury of one of the famous stories. We even knew it before the internet. There was that rumor that Eric Stoltz was originally going to be Marty McFly, and he was taking the role a little bit too seriously. He was very much a method actor, and he wouldn't let anyone call him Eric on the set. He went by Marty, and in fact, when I think there's a scene where he is rough with the guy who played Biff, Tom Wilson, and he kind of bruised him up a little bit, and he was looking forward to the later scene when he gets to punch Marty because he really wanted to punch Eric Stoltz. But he didn't get the chance because about a third of the way into filming, they decided to let him go and replace him with who they originally wanted, but couldn't get a hold of Michael J. Fox. They said, let's do whatever we can to get this guy because this is the guy for the movie. So they did end up getting him. And to bring it back to Quentin Tarantino, when Michael J. Fox was asked about Eric Stoltz in the interview later on, he goes, to be fair, I couldn't have done his role in Pulp Fiction because Eric Stoltz plays a role in Pulp Fiction.
Right.
Yeah, and he goes, so yeah, I think each of us got the role that fit us best. So he did a nice nod to Eric in that way. And again, Eric Stoltz, he's one of my favorite actors. So he just wasn't right for this role, obviously.
No, yeah, and famously, I think there's some kind of footage out there, or
Yeah, I
actual
think so.
footage that
Yeah,
before they
there's actually film
yeah, they had to
footage of it.
reshoot,
Yeah.
like what you're saying, they reshoot in my notes that would be kind of cool to see. Although you would probably definitely see maybe in an alternative universe, interdimensional cable,
Yeah.
little Rick and Morty nod there. But
Well, with
yeah,
the AI and everything, we could probably in a year or two we could maybe plug in Eric Stoltz and do the whole movie with him.
we
We're getting close to
who
that.
who knows? Who knows? We are
Yeah.
entering strange new world with AI and what it will or won't do.
Yeah.
Of
And
course, with the strikes on. Just wanted to mention that.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, yeah. But with Eric Stoltz going by Marty during the filming of it, when they did fire him, they were going around to the actors letting them know that they were going to need to do reshooting because they had let go Eric. And Christopher Lloyd says, "Who's Eric?" Because he only knew him by Marty. He goes, "I thought the guy's name was Marty." 'Cause,
that's funny. Because that's the way he approached it.
yeah,
There, and
yeah, yeah.
I'll play a little bit of this here while we talk. And
Hmm.
of course, seriously,
Gotta rate the
seriously,
movie.
yeah. No, don't even bother rating anything on an Amazon property because it doesn't mean anything. It means nothing. All joking aside, but yeah, I was gonna say Steven Spielberg also is famously was attached to this in that intro there on
Oh,
the
and I do have to nod towards Leah Thompson. At the time, I was had a huge crush on her.
Big
So
Crush.
that I obviously I think part of my reason for seeing the movie was probably because she was in it because I was crushing hard on her. But yeah,
I could see that. I could no,
yep.
I could see that as a young man who looked up to one of my role models in the '80s was Michael J. Fox. I didn't really know who Leah Thomas was, but
Hmm.
she certainly is attractive for sure. Very pretty. But yeah, no, this goes into to explore new territory that say the other sci-fi places just couldn't touch. Like you could have little light nods of humor, like you were saying, it is a sci-fi comedy, very much an entertainment vehicle. Whereas you might get a chuckle here or there on Next Generation or the original series or something like that, but or God, you get some dystopian nightmare future, which actually was part of this movie, like one of the alternative universes that they kind of stumbled into in the second one, like where everybody's, the school's been shut down for years, and then everybody's got a shotgun or everybody's got a gun, and it's all crime, and Marty McFly is there, and his girlfriend's passed out, and they got to kind of they realize what the hell's going on. They scramble to fix it. But in any case, yeah, the second movie was very good. Still lighthearted, but I don't know about. We're not really gonna do ratings, but unless you want to say something about it, but
No,
definitely an
well,
adventure movie.
I would say, yeah, with you saying and Quentin saying that the first one's a perfect movie. Obviously, any sequel is going to be lesser than the original in that it can't really stand alone. You have to have the first movie
Right.
before you have the sequel. But and also the sequel, a lot of times you really have to almost have to replicate the first movie for people to be satisfied. So it's harder to do something original with the second one. Whereas I think they did actually do something original with the second one. They they really got convoluted with the timeline and changing the future and the past and all of
Right.
that. They went into some weird and interesting places. Like there was at one point they they'd went back in time to again to the original 1950s, and that whole overlap where he's having to stay out of the way of his other self
Right.
and all of that. That was very exciting for me, and when I watched it, and it did a lot of interesting things. And at the time there was a lot of sequels that were really engaging to me, that were that had took what the original did and really twisted it and took it into maybe darker places than the original, and interesting places. Maybe not structurally a better movie than the first one, but I liked it better. I enjoyed the part two just for how far it went
Sure.
beyond the first one, as well as say I also loved the Temple of Doom, Indiana Jones and Temple of Doom, for how outrageous it got and how
Hmm.
dark. I felt the same way with Gremlins 2. It was very much kind of really out there movie. Just I enjoyed sequels that said, okay, yeah, we did the first movie, but let's go crazy with the second one. And then a lot of times with the third one, they kind of bring it back in and kind of bring it back towards the original. And I kind of felt like the third movie of Back to the Future went back to kind of a crowd pleasing kind of, hey, let's just do a little fun movie here, and it just kind of lost the crazy charm of the second one. Um, the same way with not to get too far off, but Indiana Jones. I, I've never really truly loved the third movie just because it got back to maybe more of a crowd pleasing type of movie and didn't go crazy like the second movie. Yeah, that's
Oh,
my
the
little
one the
little
one with Sean Connery in
yeah,
'89.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a decent movie, but it just didn't go to the crazy places that
Yeah, it's
the
funny you say
second
that.
one did.
Yeah, the Back to the Future definitely explored interesting concepts that had kind of lightly been touched on, like, hey, don't run into your double, don't run into your,
Hmm.
you'll cause a big catastrophe. Something catastrophic could happen. Let's not find out. Whereas,
Hmm.
like, a place like the kind of movie rules, I guess. I kind of joke. I'm joking a little bit, but if you watch
Hmm.
like a classic '80s horror slasher flick, something along those lines, there are rules, so to speak, that you can follow, and then you can. It's kind of fun to kind of put that lens on it and have fun with it if you've seen it a million times.
Hmm.
Likewise, this similar science fiction isn't too dissimilar from that as well. But yeah, they touch on that there. They overlap quite a bit. Very interesting concept. Of course, it's always fun to back in the '80s. You know, the joke or the saying is that like where's my flying car? We're not quite there yet. But in any case, yeah, I think I definitely I know what you're talking about as far as like liking the sequel in its own right. I definitely when I think of this, probably before maybe 2 or 3 years ago, I would have said that I would have probably preferred the second one more than the first, to be honest with you, because that was the one that like where I actually saw it, that we not in the theater, but like we actually rented it fairly recently, from like when it came out, like when it was probably around 90 or so, like when I saw it. So that was kind of important for me, and that's one I remember seeing more so than the first one. Aside from, to be honest with you, the details were kind of blurry for it before I rewatched it, like several years later on. But you remember different. You don't. It's no telling what you're going to remember when you're a kid. But I do. The Back to the Future Part Two has a special place for me, so I definitely understand that sentimental nature of what you're talking about, at least in my opinion. Of course, it's the hoverboard, and it's the future, and you're kind of like, oh, I don't want to see the one that in the past with their parents and the Calvin Klein. I want to see the flying cars and the thing. Of course, that was just my natural bias back then, was toward that, the future, like any young sci-fi nerd. But it was definitely fulfilling. But going back and seeing it now as an adult and sharing it with my kiddos, and rewatching it, there's just another layer. Of course, with all the things that I know now about cinema, the very let me put a caveat on that. The very limited knowledge that I have when it comes to cinema and movies and how things are made and how scripts are written and how this and that. Kind of like the little kind of inside baseball, which is really really fun to get into, especially on the history aspect. With somebody like Quentin Tarantino, mentioning it, or not just him, but other famous movie producers and people opining on things. It's always fun. Of course, we both share a love of Chris Gore, and we also have our own shared history with that. Which, before I get too long-winded, I wanted to mention that we had ordered Attack of the Dock by Chris Gore. We splurged a little bit, and we pulled a little bit of the funding, and we got the signed copy of the Chris Gore version of Attack of the Dock. So shout out to him and shout out to that. You can actually order it now, and you'll get it in a few days. But that's really cool out there. And while I'm doing shout outs here, I will also shout out a friend of the show. Even cooler, because you know him, and we actually got to sit down and interview him, and his first published book, which we want to celebrate, is and I'm going to be mentioning this quite a bit, because I just think it's amazing and awesome to be able to share with the audience, somebody out there who, just like us, you're just a normal everyday Jane or Joe Q public, but you have something and you want to get out there and write it. Do it. Do it. We were actually talking about this pre-show about different things that we've seen, and YouTube creators, and how the future is very much independent. But this is 14 Dark Windows, a collection of short stories by a friend of the show, Scott Dyson. It's
Yeah,
available on
absolutely.
Amazon, and we will definitely include that link to his website as well as to our show and to the book if you want to pick it up. But give a shout out to him. That's just awesome. And
Oh yeah.
I'm waiting this weekend to where I can actually enjoy it in some downtime and quiet.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
it's all about it's like what Doc Brown said about making the future your own.
sure, yeah,
Yeah.
sure, absolutely, yeah. Well, mind is a terrible thing to waste. And
Yeah.
I think I was gonna. We were kind of chit chatting about what our outro should be for the show, and I guess we completely forgot and skipped over what Biff famously make fun of him, like you better make like a tree and get out of here.
Yeah,
Don't
and
you mean it's made like a tree and leave? You sound like an
oh,
idiot.
let's see. Now Tom Wilson is the guy that played Biff. He famously has a little card. He gets asked about Back to the Future all the time when when he's doing conventions and whatnot. And
Oh.
so he made a little card that he gives people, so that it answers all the frequently asked questions about Back to the Future. Let me see if I can pull that up. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see. It's a little long, so I'm not going to. Crap. Let's see. Okay. Yeah.
While Tom's doing that, I'll
Uh-huh.
mention some of the other fun facts. Um, the clock tower is iconic in this. That plays a pivotal role. Even there, there's also a throw in. I think it was in the third movie, which we're kind of loosely covering. Okay,
Yeah.
all right, that is Upworthy. All right, let me bring that in, pull that
And
in, and then I'll share it here in a minute.
yeah, and
Go ahead,
we could
intro.
we could probably put that in the notes as well. But yeah, he gives this little card out that he prints out, and just kind of answers the little questions that people usually have for him. But
That's
yeah,
fun.
I guess he gets tired of answering the same question over and over, so he has
I
that
don't
little
blame
card
him.
there. And yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense.
Good grief.
Yeah, but yeah, I thought about reading it and on here, but I was like, a little long, maybe not. But yeah, so that's kind of a fun thing that he does, and I'm sure if I got that card from him, I'd ask him to sign it, because that's it's kind of become kind of a famous little thing there. But yeah, yeah, it seems like everybody. Oh, and another thing, Crispin Glover. Another reason why I like the movie is, I guess, he's sort of like, if you had to compare him, he's like, what's his name on the Flash movie, that the crazy guy. Um,
Oh gosh, Crispin Gloven.
uh,
I don't know. You're asking me for a miracle out of my brain, which is not possible.
Oh,
But at
that's
this,
fine. I could look it up. But no, he's sort of like modern day Ezra Miller. Sort of. Except Crispin Glover doesn't have too much controversial about him. he's but he was just sort of kind of a crazy out there kind of guy. He did an famous interview on David Letterman, where he gets up and almost kicks David Letterman in the face. He's sort of like a out there kind of guy, and he he found out, and he didn't like the ending of the original Back to the Future, because and it kind of ends kind of classically 80s, where the he kind of Marty inadvertently kind of changes the future, and makes his father a success. And so the happy ending is that everybody got, all of his family got rich, and it kind of placed the value on money and things, as opposed to maybe love of family. And Crispin Glover kind of it was vocal about his distaste for the ending, and what it was saying. And so when it came to the sequel, he wanted to have kind of maybe editorial input on the movie. And he was kind of rubbing Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale the wrong way, so they actually offered him less money than everybody else to come back, and he ended up turning them down. And
really,
so yeah, and so in the sequel, they they kill him off in the future portion of it, and the portion that they had to have him in it, they recast him. They reused footage from the original movie that they ended up not using in the original movie, and then also they made some they hired another actor, and made him look like Crispin Glover. And there was a lawsuit that Crispin Glover did, saying they didn't have the right to use his likeness for that sequel. And they ended up settling out of court. I think he made off with a lot more money than he would have did if he actually had done the movie. But
that's
they
fun.
ended up, yeah, in the Writers Guild, they put in some rules in about against not using someone's likeness without their permission. So I don't know if that has. I was kind of curious because, and
That's funny.
nothing that I read said anything about it. But I wonder
Mm-hmm.
if that case will play a part of with the AI generated people nowadays, if that those rules will apply to that, which I would imagine it would. And it's interesting that this movie, dealing with the past and future and time travel, may have an effect on what we're actually kind of dealing with modern day in the future with with computers and being able to generate people and their likenesses, and whether or not that's ethical or the ethics of that.
Yeah, no, that famous. I have no doubt that it will. It will, no
Hmm.
doubt. And I was gonna say too. There was a thought that I had fleeting there that I wanted to touch on, but in any
Hmm.
case, the well, you just don't know with the almanac plot
Oh
device.
yeah. Hmm.
The standard book from the future that tells you all the things.
Hmm.
Although, if I want to put my nerd hat on here a little bit, the fact that you would have this thing from the future and then it had all the famous things done, or famous bouts and sporting events all for the next 50 years or whatever it is, or 50
Hmm.
to 2000 or whatever it was. The fact that, well, that kind of goes back to, like, well, how much of again, this is kind of a great thing with all the good movies, like, kind of spark this imagination of, like, what could happen. But in any
Hmm.
case, what I was saying was, you would think that, like, well, it's just a small little town, and the universe wouldn't change too much. Surely the world wouldn't change much, but apparently in that it didn't all too much, because you could still make it. Of course, when the almanac is kind of released, and this is in part two, to be specific, Biff gets a hold of it, and it's just a hellhole, and we kind of touched upon it a little bit earlier in the
Hmm.
show, kind of explaining it, but there's not much to explain here, but I would say, oh, the other thing too is the fact that the 80s, when you're a kid, you don't think about this, but when you're an adult,
Hmm.
young teenager, adult, you kind of think about it. You give it a little bit more, or the thought crosses your mind, or it's more likely to. The fact that the 80s, 1985,
Hmm.
and when they go back in time was 30 years prior,
Hmm.
that they were much closer to the 50s and the 60s and the 70s,
Hmm.
obviously, because that was just yesterday. Whereas
Hmm.
nowadays, it's, as the years go on and I get older and you get
Hmm.
older and everybody gets older,
Hmm.
now it's 50, 40, 60 years
Right.
in the past, and it kind of blows your mind a little bit,
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
that kind of that time jump, because
Yeah.
it's just funny,
Well,
just remarkable for sure.
and to build on that point, in 1985 there was a big excitement about the 50s. Like you said,
Hmm.
it seemed like forever ago, and we
Nostalgia, yep.
the nostalgia. We romanticized about the 50s.
Right.
There was all these 1950s diners that replicated diners from the 50s, and there was this excitement about the 50s. I remember my younger sisters, they would have a 50s day in high school where everybody dressed up in their 50s outfits, and she had the poodle skirts and
Yep.
everything. um and that's happening now, and it was interesting in part two. They played around with it with the 80s cafe, with the nostalgia for the
Mhm.
80s, which takes place in the future 2015. And what happened in 2015, everybody was excited about the 80s. They had the Stranger Things show, and the nostalgia for the 80s, and it's, yeah, like you said, it's kind of crazy. um Another of our family here on the first and last the Nerdom, Joe Lansdale. We did an interview with him. He's a writer,
That's right.
and I read a book they wrote in the 80s. I read it in the 80s, and then they ended up making the movie of it, a few years ago. And it was interesting, having read a book of the time set in present day during that time, but then seeing the movie. and it's kind of a you know, it's a period piece from the 80s. It was just kind of a mind warp for me. But yeah, you live long enough, you start to see things in a different perspective. But yeah, just we kind of skewed towards a older audience, so a lot of people are
Mhm.
probably out there nodding their head. But if we've got a couple of the youngins watching, just wait in 30 years. The 2020s are going to be nostalgia for the 2050s,
It happens. It is 100% a generational thing.
Mhm.
And I can remember talking to my parents, asking them, "Hey, what was it like back?" And then they remember this and that. I remember one of the things that just blows my mind, which is my dad growing up as a kid. He remembers when radio was out. Obviously radio had been out for quite some time, for
Mhm.
forever, even when he was a teenager. But he remembers when you could listen to stereo on the radio, like from the
Mhm.
radio, like that was just like something that was just,
Mhm.
it's kind of like it's akin, I guess, visually going from, 480p, 4 by 3, a TV to 16 by 9, 16 by 10, ultra wide 4K HD, da 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 da.
Mhm.
So it's much akin. I do remember the first time I saw that, but it just kind of, it's a fun point. And I think this
Mhm.
is why the film, it stands the test of time, not only because of the quality, but it naturally provokes the thought-provoking. Who hasn't ever thought about what would it have been like to go back in time, or this or that? Obviously,
Mhm.
that's always been a fun little kind of nerd and non-nerd topic to go
Mhm.
to talk about and whatnot. And I think I read something like, if I, it was like one of those throwaway little factoid things on Facebook or social, whatever it was, and it said like something like, if so and so went back in time now, Marty McFly would have been going back to 1990 or something like that. I don't know. I didn't.
Mhm. Yeah.
I just kind of took it at face value and moved along. I wasn't going to expend any serious brain power on it. But you nowadays you have this thing where you have the 90s, and those are looked
Mhm.
upon very
Yep.
fondly by our generation.
Yeah, which is getting to be like 30 years ago it was the
Our
90s. Yeah. Um
surprise, we are becoming the boomers.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I was kind of along the lines of what you were saying. I was while I was kind of revisiting Back to the Future and just kind of being nostalgic for it. I was thinking, why haven't they remade Back to the Future? It might be actually kind of a fun idea to, yeah, set it during nowadays and have him jump back to the 80s or the 90s. But I read where Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale own the rights to Back to the Future, and they said that there would not be any reboots or remakes while they're alive. So we're not going to see anything by them for this.
Right. I
So
will
yeah.
say,
Mhm.
yeah, I will say that there is a more current version of this, and I believe it just came out recently. But it is the play, the theatrical.
Mhm.
Excuse me. I had to catch my breath there.
Yeah.
It is the play version of Back to the Future.
Mhm.
And what I've heard that it is a smash hit over in Europe, UK, whatever it is.
Mhm.
But it's kind of having a little bit more wider flow. So you're probably not going to hear anything about it here in North America until it kind of blows up, and maybe it will, maybe it won't. Who knows?
Mhm.
But I know that is out, and I also saw that they had hit the fan con type circuit recently as well. I think they had done a big publicity outing in 2015, of course, because that was famously when the date where Back to the Future Part Two was set in. I know they did, and I was looking at some of the promotional photos when I was scrolling through here while we were talking about the movies. And I have no doubt that was it. But I did read recently that they had made an appearance or so, one of the
Mhm.
bigger ones. I don't know, but who knows? Of course, we kind of covered that a little bit in our nerding out, and how
Mhm.
made the observation that those perhaps are going through a new a wind down before they're reborn.
Mhm.
These kind of these big things that are out there.
Yeah.
But and again, we'll have that. I'll have that link to that news article I was talking about how the play. So if it ever comes to your city and you're lucky enough to see it, go see
Mhm.
it. You just don't know until unless the God, I haven't been to a play in forever. And it depends upon your city. You might have better outlets for seeing those than not. But in any case, go see it. Why not? It wouldn't hurt anything. I don't think they're like I don't think they're doing the modern audience thing to it. That's not what I think they're doing. I think they're doing a more measured take, like where it's just the characters as you know them. Yeah, but good for them. Maybe maybe it is a good thing that some things aren't. I go back and forth on that because the thing is that if a thing is not created, I go back and forth on that idea because to me, even if the new thing that is made sucks, what if it is? What if it is good? What if it sparks a new whatever and it becomes its own type thing? Just like the and we covered this in the past in our grab bag show, the fact that Harry Potter is being remade for but on a smaller screen. That
Hmm.
Warner Brothers is doing that. Oh, that's what I remember now. I remember what I wanted to cover too, and it's apropos too here because we're kind of probably hitting the caboose of the train here. But I I was very lucky and I was very fortunate enough to be able to go through. I went to Universal Studios in Florida before I was married, before I had kids, for a spring break one year. And I recall we went to Universal. We didn't go to Disney World, but we went to Universal. And we went through some of the rides. One of them was Twister, which is a Bill Paxton, Helen Hunt, I think, flick, which is uh, nobody cares about that. But Back to the Future had a ride. They had an attraction there, and I was one of the last group of folks to be able to go on it. And I think the next couple of years after that, they retired it. But you could tell when you go, it was cute. It was cute. It
Yeah.
probably was a much bigger hit when it was new, and the
Mm.
effects were there.
Yeah.
I don't recall too much from it, but aside from like cool. I got to check. Like it was cool. It definitely had served millions and millions and
Yeah.
millions of amusement park riders.
Yeah.
But it was still cool to be able to go and see that.
Yeah, I was reading. I never did get to go on that ride, but I was reading how I guess they sold T-shirts for the ride, and the T-shirt was what Marty McFly wore in the future in Back to the Future Part Two. That T-shirt that he wore was a T-shirt, and I saw where I guess the people reselling those shirts nowadays are a collector's item. They're going for over $200. If you'd have snagged a
Wow.
T-shirt, you might have could have made some money. But yeah, they are licensing it for various things
Sure.
like you said, the musical or the play, and then they also had a video game that was the sequel to Part Three called Back to the Future, the game that came out in 2010. I think there was like an NES game too back in the 80s that was garbage, but I've heard good things about the game that came out in 2010. It was more of a kind of a choose your adventure, and Bob Gale wrote some of the dialogue for that. Who obviously co-wrote the Back to the Future movies. So yeah, that's kind of exciting, and they it was kind of crazy that Back to the Future was such a hit and was geared towards kids and all of that. But back in the 80s, they weren't merchandising fiends like they are today. But
No, I
everything's kind of caught up, and there are actual Back to the Future action figures that NECA is putting out
really.
today. So
Oh yeah.
there's a whole line. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I saw there was a DeLorean time machine one that it
Hmm.
periodically pops up in
Hmm.
my feed. But I was going to say, yeah, you're right. That's a good point. That's a good point because kids nowadays have a pocketbook, they have a wallet, they have a budget. Whereas I don't know about you, but I was lucky if I got $5 every so often for doing whatever. Like I
Hmm.
wasn't as quite. It was a different world back then. It was a very
Yeah.
much a different world, and
Yeah.
definitely not from what my kids have now. Didn't have smartphone, didn't have a
Hmm.
computer, didn't have three computers. Didn't have five
Hmm.
TV. I'm kind of being a little facetious here, but I think you get my point. But yeah,
Hmm.
it, as always, I think the bigger point here is that not only are we covering this, 40 years later, 30 years later down the road, whatever
Uh-huh.
it is. Shame on me for not doing the math or whatever, but uh, 35 years ago, the
Mhm.
fact is that you have that it is still alive in some form, very much so. And you were talking about licensing and all that. Boy, that's one thing that some of the big corporations, big Omnicorp film company, they don't get. They don't do that anymore like they used to. And I actually, I had mentioned to you, and I think this would probably be a good story here because we're hitting the hour mark here. But I was going to say, although we didn't cover the third one, I for some reason I have it. I will always remember the third one came out in the '90s, which is it had the Western theme and some things changed. It was not
Mhm.
a hit like the other two, and it is what it is. It stands on its own right for nostalgia, but I do remember. For some reason, I always remember this, and it's probably because I have a lot of brothers and sisters, and I'm the oldest sibling. So when we would be able to go to McDonald's or whatnot and see the toys or whatever, of course, I was already well beyond the pale, well beyond the age of caring about Happy Meals and toys that came on, unless like something really cool,
Mhm.
comic book related. And I was like, I kind of want that or whatever, but that few and fleeting for sure. But the toys, I remember one of the toys was a locomotive, or the locomotive time machine. And back then, they made toys a lot. Their tolerances for safety were quite a bit different. And I'm sure back when you were a kid and our parents were whatever, they would have these things that would create
Mhm.
sparks with a flint and a be in a plastic bubble housing. But
Mhm.
did that, like it would, you pull it back and then you push it forward and it would kind of throw sparks in the back. They
Mhm.
probably couldn't make that nowadays, but I always remember that
Mhm.
for some strange reason.
Mhm.
The things that stick with you. But yeah,
Mhm.
no, it's kind of I don't want to say it's an indictment on nowadays, but
Yeah.
boy, they sure missed the boat on a lot of things. But
Yeah.
yeah, the of course now what we are grown men and women nowadays, and we have practically unlimited budgets for toys and knickknacks
Yeah.
as
Yep.
compared to being a kid
Well,
and having a
yeah,
very tight budget.
Right.
It's something
yeah,
that is I've noticed is a phenomenon in
yeah,
our generation. We just plunk
yeah.
down on it and get it.
Yeah, and we're our nerd obsessions just grow with age. So I could never see my father having a collection of action figures, but he had his own little nerd stuff. Like he was into electronics and stuff, so he had his shed with his shed full of little knickknacks and
Yep.
whatever that he kind of tinkered with. So yeah, everybody has things kind of evolve or devolve or however you want to look at it. But yeah, there's one of the things I was gonna talk about was the marketing in this, like all the product placements. Like Pepsi was a big thing. Obviously in Back to the Future Part Two, they had all that in there, and I was reading a funny story about the guy that was behind raisins was really pushing for raisins being in Back to the Future, and he was saying, what ET did for Reese's Pieces, Back to the Future could do for raisins, and he was pushing for bowls of raisins to be everywhere, and uh, Robert Zemeckis is like, that's going to look like a bowl of dirt on that camera. That's not
Yeah,
going to look good.
not
Yeah,
quite the same. Yeah, not
so
quite the same.
so he had at one point Marty jumps over a a bench with a billboard on it that had California raisins plastered on it, and
That's funny.
that wasn't enough for the raisin guy. He asked for his money back, but
That's funny. Oh man, I would
yeah.
have been ecstatic. That would have been amazing. But I will say that the California Raisins was a very fun promotional thing. I remember
Yeah,
when
they
I first
finally
growing up as a
figured it
kid.
out. Yeah, yeah, they
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 did. They
they
did.
figured it out. But yeah, it's and also I read where Robert Zemeckis wasn't real happy about doing the sequel being in the future because
Mm,
he knew that whatever they did, that obviously they weren't going to predict the future. So
Right.
so
Benchmarked.
it was he was thinking all the future movies always kind of age kind of badly in that they're looked at as like at the time period it's like, oh yeah, he said they kind of knew we wouldn't have flying cars in the future, but you had to have flying cars if you're going to do a future movie, so that had to be in the movie. But it did kind of predict a few things, like the video screens on the phones, and the big screen TVs and whatnot. So they did they could kind of project what was going to be, what it was going to be like. But obviously it's also a comedy, so you got to play up elements
Right.
as well and make them larger than life. But yeah, again, they're smart enough and knew that if the 50s was big, 30 years into the 80s was going to be big 30 years into that future. And so that's
Oh
kind
yeah.
of that whole nostalgia cafe thing was kind of a nod to that, and that was kind of, like I said, kind of predicted what was going to become. And like I'm predicting now, the 2020s are going to be a big thing in the 2050s. Get
Oh yeah.
nostalgic already. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say too. There's a scene in there where Marty goes into the diner in part two, and he sees this old school retro kind of arcade game. Well, retro in 2015 anyway, and it's a shoot 'em up one. And apparently, the Marty McFly character is just amazing at that video game. And he kind of he boom 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 crack shot. I think it was the
Mhm.
score or whatever, and he got it. And the kids are kind of like the little kids are all like, "Oh, you got to use your hands."
Yeah, and one of those kids was Elijah Wood in one of his first
Ah,
roles. So.
you don't say. No kidding. That's crazy. Well, you just kind
Yeah.
of come full circle too. I think I
Hmm.
told you a little bit ago. I fell into a nostalgia trap on YouTube. It recommended like an hour-long roll of like old commercials from the 80s and 90s, and
Hmm.
sure enough, I fell into it. And the California Raisins were part of that, so it could kind of
Hmm.
come full circle. But yeah, this is yeah. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention too before we take off here. Um, Both movies, part one and part two, were known for using groundbreaking special effects. Of course, that is kind of like became a hallmark of Spielberg. Anything associated with Spielberg or Zemeckis, for sure. And that continues along the line. The great directors, and here's my tie-in for Dune. The great directors that have that vision, they know how to do that cinematography, and they know how to coax current technology and push it just a little bit further to get that extra mile that makes something so special and unique. And I think probably the only thing I can't think of, but I didn't do the research, was the flames for how they did the tires. I think I
Yeah.
want to say MythBusters did something with that, but I don't
Yeah.
know.
Right.
We've already kind of
Mhm.
milked the thing out. I think.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, and ILM did the special effects, which is George Lucas started the
yep.
ILM, so obviously it's going to be top tier. And then surprisingly, you know, with these big summer blockbusters, almost all of them are scored by John Williams, but this one
Hmm.
was scored. The soundtrack, the score for this is very memorable. It's done by Alan Silvestri, and shouts out to him because yeah, that music for Back to the Future, everybody knows it when they hear it. Or
Oh, classic.
yeah, and shout out to Huey Lewis and the News. They do contribute a couple of songs. Anytime someone mentions Back to the Future, got to get back in time. That song
Yep.
starts playing in my head, and another big thing back in the day, which is not a thing now, is putting rock songs in movies. Because what you did was you would then make a music video that would be played heavily on
Oh yeah, MTV.
yeah, MTV music
VH1.
television.
Yep.
Yeah, so that was a constant, and you wanted to get the top artist of the day because that way it would get played more often on that channel, and that was free advertising for the movie. You just watch those things. So yeah, I remember seeing, and Huey Lewis was huge back then. So yeah, you had those. One other thing tied to the music, again in Back to the Future, famously, Marty McFly plays the Chuck Berry song um, at the end of it, and kind of introduces rock. And you know, the guy goes, "Hey, you've been looking for a new sound. Listen to this," and gets but yeah, I was kind of, don't think about him being a black artist and Marty McFly doing it. Even then, I don't know if I thought about, I knew there was something a little bit off about that.
Mm.
I don't
Oh,
know.
right, right. That
Yeah,
whole
yeah,
scene
yeah.
in the first one. Yeah, yeah, I know what you're talking
Yeah,
about. Yep,
yeah,
yep, yep.
yeah. Just yeah, yeah. I don't know how that would play today, but yeah, it just kind of, yeah. I was kind of like, should they do that? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, well, the things change and move around a little
Uh-huh.
bit. And I was going to say here, I think we're coming up to the end. If you had anything to
Hmm.
add, or subtract from what we've covered, I think we covered a lot. But this one, I think this one was more of a love, passion thing for us both. It's always
Hmm.
fun to kind of go and cover the thing that everybody else has covered, too,
Hmm.
ad infinitum. But of
Yep.
course, that doesn't matter, because that's the beautiful thing, is that everybody has their own unique experiences with these things. And this, of all things, is a cultural touchstone, which we so very rarely get into. And I think probably some of the reason why I wanted to do this too was the Barbie, that we covered, not too long ago. That became its own right. And the Lego Movie, these things that are organic,
Hmm.
that the people choose to adore and love and fawn over and
Hmm.
have endless nerd things around them.
Hmm.
You can't. None of this stuff can be artificial. And boy, if it's try to push, for modern audiences or whatever they're trying to go for, it just falls flat. Or if it does, if it is popular, it's not going to carry on through the timeline like this movie and others. There's countless others that we've touched on that became just beautiful, beautiful, parts of our heritage,
Yeah. Yeah.
cultural heritage. But in any case, I was going to
Yeah. And
say, oh, go ahead, go ahead. Sorry.
also one last thing. We don't want to wear out our welcome. Whereas, like, say, hey, I was looking at the runtime on both Back to the Future
I saw
1
that
and
too.
2.
Right.
Both are under 2 hours long.
Yep.
If it was made today, I could guarantee you it would be at least 2.5 hours long, and there's no need for the bloat. I tell the one big thing I complain about movies now, they need a better editor. They need to cut it down. And but yeah, and like we might need editor every once in a while for our
Yeah.
show, but
Yeah, I didn't get into it too much, but that was probably one of the things that probably was, could have been cut down by 15 minutes. The Barbie movie, I think that could have been cut down a little bit shorter, and you wouldn't have sacrificed the quality at all. Um, Caveat being, Oppenheimer did not feel like 3 hours, and then going back to, I also saw, Dead Reckoning, Mission Impossible. That was too long, as well, in my
Mhm.
opinion. Was just went on a little bit too long, but didn't didn't feel like it. Both one and two, probably the third one, definitely you felt a certain kind of way, and in that. But yeah, great point, great point. And before we wrap up here, I wanted to say again, if you made it this far, we boy, we appreciate you watching, and we would love to hear from you, hear your commentary. What was your first memory of this movie? What do you carry with it to this day?
Yep.
Is it a favorite? Did you not like it?
Yep.
What are
Do
you
you
what
have
is your
a Yeah, do you have a different sci-fi comedy that you love from the
Sure.
80s?
Sure. Do you like Rick and Morty? Do you like this? Do you like that? I mean, we'd love to hear it, and more importantly, we want to thank you, for being our fans and supporting us in that way. And we just humbly ask, if you like what you see, subscribe. you want to see more, we'd love to bring you more. We will continue to do so as we do this
Mm-hmm.
thing and we learn and grow. As you see, this whole show has completely changed from being made on Zoom with zero production value or effort to just two dudes talking about, the nerddom, all the way out to what we have today. So we're very proud of it, and we like any good content creator. We know we are always improving, and we are always looking for an eye out for, not necessarily the next big thing. We don't really do that, but kind of looking to the past, and also kind of to the future as well, because we have this is a very big movie year. I think that I don't want to foreshadow too much, but I think this is going to be a very, very big movie year for the folks that have been out in the desert for a long time on the sci-fi front, like where you've just had this rehashed this and that. But in any case, I don't want to wax too poetic on that point, but like and subscribe like the graphic shows.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll can't wait to see you in the future as we go forward here. And I've been Mike.
And I'm Thomas. I'm getting ready to head off into the sunset as you see it behind me. I'll I'll see you. I'll see you later.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Well.
Yeah, I can't do the thing with the thing. But, as a special treat.
Where Tom and Mike are going, they do not need roads. This has been a The First, The Last, The Nerdom production. Now make like a tree and scram.